The brass service lift shuddered as it climbed towards the highest floor of Blackthorn Castle Hospital. Alina Brooks rested one hand on the worn leather duffel at her feet. She had travelled with the same bag for nearly 10 years. Every temporary contract, every hospital closure, every staff shortage. She had learned something after moving from one position to the next. Never unpack on the first day. Temporary places became easier to leave when they never truly felt like home. 9 nurses had arrived before her. 9 had resigned. The steward who hired her had repeated the number twice during the telephone interview, almost as though she deserved one final chance to change her mind. She had nearly taken it. The lift stopped with a heavy clang. The doors slid open onto a corridor so quiet it seemed to absorb sound. Black marble stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings, centuries older than the countries beyond the castle walls, watched from polished walls. Every servant she passed lowered their eyes instead of offering a greeting. Nobody smiled. Hospitals carried many kinds of silence. This one carried caution. A woman in a charcoal uniform stood waiting outside the lift. "You are Nurse Brooks." I am Mrs. Holloway, household steward." Her gaze dropped briefly to the duffel. "You haven't unpacked." Alina offered a polite smile. "I've learned not to rush that decision." Mrs. Holloway studied her for a moment. A practical habit. Neither woman laughed. As they walked, Alina counted the guards posted throughout the private wing. 1, 3, 6, not hospital security. Military. Each wore a dark ceremonial uniform embroidered with a silver raven beneath a crown. Mrs. Holloway stopped before a pair of carved oak doors. "You've read Her Highness's file." "I have." "What do you believe is wrong with Princess Lyra?" It was an unusual question. Most employers preferred certainty. Mrs. Holloway seemed to value observation. Alina considered her answer carefully. "The reports describe violent outbursts. They do. They also describe something else." Mrs. Holloway waited. Every incident begins after someone approaches without warning or touches her unexpectedly. And? Alina rested a hand lightly against the medical folder tucked beneath her arm. "I don't think the reports describe aggression." "What do they describe?" "A frightened child." For the first time, something shifted in the steward's carefully composed expression. The previous nurses disagreed. They restrained her. It was not a question. Mrs. Holloway gave a slow nod. Alina exhaled quietly. Then they probably convinced her she had another reason to be afraid. Mrs. Holloway looked at the nursery doors for several seconds before unlocking them. "You may enter." The nursery felt like another world. Morning sunlight poured through towering windows. Shelves overflowed with books instead of medical equipment. Wooden toys filled neatly organized baskets. A grand piano stood near a wide stone fireplace. Someone had spent years trying to build an ordinary childhood inside an extraordinary palace. The little girl beneath the window made it impossible to forget where they were. Princess Lyra looked no older than 8. Silver-white hair rested almost to her waist. A cream ribbon lay loosely across sightless grey eyes. She sat perfectly still. Not looking. Listening, Alina recognized the posture immediately. Children who lost one sense often built extraordinary awareness through the others. Every sound became another piece of the room. A young maid entered carrying a lunch tray. My Lady Lyra's shoulders tightened. "I've brought your soup." The maid stepped closer. Another step. Then another. Without thinking, she reached for the child's shoulder. The reaction came instantly. The tray crashed to the floor. Porcelain shattered. The princess cried out and swung towards the unexpected contact, striking the maid hard enough to send both of them tumbling across the carpet. Within seconds, the nursery erupted. Guards burst through both entrances. One reached for the child. Another grabbed leather restraints hanging neatly beside the doorway. Elena moved before she had time to question herself. "Stop," her voice carried across the room. The guards hesitated, not because she had authority, because someone else had entered. The temperature seemed to drop. Measured footsteps crossed the marble floor. No one spoke. No one needed to. Every servant lowered their head. Every guard straightened. Mrs. Holloway bowed. "My king." Elena turned. The vampire king looked nothing like the stories. No flowing cloak, no theatrical display. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit beneath a charcoal coat, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression calm enough to seem almost ordinary. Until his eyes found his daughter. Everything human in his face disappeared, behind centuries of discipline. "What happened?" The guard answered immediately. "She attacked again, Your Majesty." The king said nothing. His gaze moved from the shattered bowl to the restraint in the guard's hand, then to the little girl pressed against the corner beneath the window. Lyra had covered both ears. She rocked gently, whispering through uneven breaths. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The room had described her as dangerous. Elena saw only a child apologizing for being frightened. Without raising his voice, Adrian spoke. "Everyone leaves." The guards hesitated. His eyes lifted. Now no one questioned him. Within moments the nursery emptied until only 4 people remained. The king, Mrs. Holloway, Elena and the trembling little girl curled beneath the window. Adrian took one slow step forward. Lyra, the rocking eased, though it did not stop. "It's father." The little girl's head tilted slightly. "I know." His voice remained steady. "No one will touch you." A pause. "I promise." Her breathing became less ragged, but she stayed where she was, her back against the wall beneath the window. Adrian didn't move any closer. He had learned that forcing the distance only widened it. Elena noticed the restraint in his posture. Every instinct of a father urged him forward. Every lesson earned through painful experience kept him still. Several quiet moments passed. Nothing changed. At last Adrian looked towards Mrs. Holloway. The new nurse. Nurse Elena Brooks. His pale blue eyes settled on Elena for the first time. "You've seen enough to understand why 9 others resigned. I think they misunderstood her." Silence followed. What did they misunderstand? Elena glanced towards Lyra before answering. They believed blindness was the problem. She shook her head. "It isn't. What is?" They treated every episode like disobedience. Her voice stayed calm. "But fear and defiance aren't the same thing." Adrian watched her without blinking. "And what would you do differently?" Instead of answering, Elena quietly slipped off her shoes. She placed them beside the door. Then she unclipped her identification badge and laid it on a nearby table. The tiny piece of metal had clicked against the wood. A sound Lyra's ears had already followed. Elena deliberately removed every unnecessary noise she could. Only then did she walk. Not towards the princess, towards the bookshelves. She stopped several feet away, choosing a place where Lyra could hear her breathing without feeling cornered. Then she sat on the carpet. She reached for the nearest storybook. Without announcing herself, without asking for attention, she simply began to read. The fox woke to discover the first snow had covered every path in the forest. She read as though she were alone. Behind her nobody interrupted. The king remained exactly where he was. Mrs. Holloway scarcely seemed to breathe. Nearly a minute passed. Then a small voice broke the silence. "You missed one." Elena smiled at the page. "I did? You turned 2 pages. I wondered whether anyone would notice." Behind her she heard Adrian draw a slow breath. Then came another sound, bare feet brushing softly across the carpet. Not running, not hiding. Choosing, Lyra stopped a few feet behind her. Elena resisted every instinct to turn around. Trust often disappeared the moment it became the centre of attention. She simply continued reading. The fox became lost. The owl sounded wonderfully sleepy. The rabbit worried about absolutely everything. After another page, Lyra spoke again. "The owl isn't like that." "No? He sounds grumpy. I thought he'd had a long day. The child considered this. I suppose maybe he had. Elena smiled to herself. Another page. Another conversation between the fox and the owl. Then you make books different. I hope that's allowed. They're meant to stay the same. I think stories enjoy travelling. Lyra frowned thoughtfully. What does that mean? It means every person imagines them a little differently. A pause. You imagine the fox wrong. I probably do. For the first time since Alina had entered the nursery, a quiet giggle escaped the little girl. It lasted barely a heartbeat. Even so, it transformed the room. Mrs. Holloway lowered her eyes. Across the nursery, Adrian remained motionless. Only the slight tightening around his eyes betrayed what that tiny sound meant to him. Alina kept reading. No praise, no excitement, no celebration. The moment belonged to Lyra, not to the adults watching it. Several more pages passed before the princess spoke again. Your shoes squeaked. They usually do. You took them off. I wanted you to know exactly where I was. Lyra reached one hand across the carpet until her fingertips brushed against the abandoned shoes. You walked softer. I hoped it would help. It did. The clock somewhere beyond the nursery chimed the hour. Alina closed the book. I'm hungry. The words came so quietly they almost disappeared into the room. So am I, Alina replied. You dropped the soup, I noticed. It was a pumpkin. That's unfortunate. I don't like pumpkin. What do you like? The answer came immediately. Potatoes baked? With too much butter. I think we can agree on that. A tiny smile appeared. Mrs. Holloway quietly slipped from the room. Several minutes later she returned carrying another tray. No soup, only a baked potato split open beneath melting butter. She placed it beside Alina instead of approaching the princess. Alina thanked her. Then waited. The room stayed still. Finally Lyra asked, Is it mine? It could be. You aren't bringing it. No, why? Because you haven't asked me to. Another pause. Then, almost shyly, will you? I'd be happy to. Alina lifted the plate. I'm walking towards the little table. Each step was slow enough for Lyra to follow. I'm putting it down now. The plate touched the wood with a gentle tap. So you'll know where it is. She stepped backwards. I've moved away. Lyra waited. Then stretched out one cautious hand. Her fingers found the edge of the table. The warm plate. The potato. No panic. No flinching. A small smile spread across her face. I found it. You did. It smells right. It does. She picked up the fork. Halfway through the first bite she paused. You're still here. I said I would be. The little girl nodded once. Then she continued eating. Across the room, Adrian looked away for a moment. Not because he wished to hide his emotions, because after years of watching specialists, physicians and tutors attempt to help his daughter, he had learned not to trust hope too quickly. But for the first time in a very long while, hope had quietly entered the nursery anyway. Adrian waited until Lyra had finished half her meal before speaking. Nurse Brooks. Alina looked up. Would you walk with me? She nodded. Before standing, she turned towards the princess. I'll be back. Lyra swallowed another bite of potato. You promise? I do. The little girl gave a small nod and returned to her dinner. Only then did Alina follow the king into the corridor. The nursery doors closed softly behind them. The warmth of the room seemed to disappear the moment they stepped into the marble hallway. Rain clouds drifted across the valley beyond the tall windows. For a while neither of them spoke. Adrian finally broke the silence. She ate. Yes, she accepted food from someone she met less than an hour ago. She accepted food after she asked for help. He looked at her. You think there's a difference? I know there is. He folded his hands behind his back. Explain. Alina considered her words. Most of the reports describe what Lyra did. They do. Very few describe what everyone else did first. His expression sharpened slightly. The order matters. She nodded. When frightened children panic, adults often focus on the reaction, and you focus on the trigger. I try to. She stopped beside one of the enormous windows overlooking the forest. Every report mentioned restraint. Every report mentioned medication. Every report mentioned behavioural correction. She looked towards the nursery doors. Almost none mentioned asking permission. Adrian remained quiet. The people caring for her weren't cruel. No, they simply believed control would create safety. And it doesn't? Sometimes it creates the opposite. The king's gaze drifted towards the rain. I spent years believing I needed to protect her from everything. You still do. I do. His answer came without hesitation. But protection isn't always the same as trust. The admission surprised even him. He rarely spoke his uncertainties aloud. Alina noticed. You've already learned something many parents struggle to accept. And what's that? You can't force a child to feel safe. Another long silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. Thoughtful, finally Adrian asked, You've worked with children like Lyra before. I've worked with frightened children. There is a difference. There is. She smiled faintly. But fear has a language of its own. He waited. It doesn't matter whether it's caused by illness, trauma or loss. She hesitated before adding, Children usually tell you what they need, if you know how to listen. Exactly. Adrian studied her carefully. You speak from experience. I do. What sort? Alina rested one hand against the windowsill. For 8 years I worked in a neurological rehabilitation unit. The reports mentioned that. We treated children recovering from strokes, brain injuries, spinal trauma. She smiled sadly. They taught me far more than I ever taught them. The hospital closed. It did. You found another position. I tried. And? She laughed quietly. Private clinics wanted younger nurses. You are young. They wanted cheaper. Something about the honesty of the answer caught Adrian off guard. She hadn't complained. She hadn't blamed anyone. She had simply accepted what happened and kept moving. That's why you accepted this interview. I accepted the chance to work again. And now? She looked back towards the nursery. I still haven't accepted the job. His eyes followed hers. The bag. She nodded. I've spent years arriving somewhere only to leave a few weeks later. So you never unpack. It hurts less. For a brief moment, Adrian almost replied. Instead, he looked away. There was something painfully familiar about preparing for loss before happiness had the chance to arrive. A quiet knock interrupted them. Mrs. Holloway approached with measured steps. My king. What is it? The council delegation has arrived. His expression hardened. I gave no audience today. They insist the matter concerns the succession. What matter? The steward hesitated. They've learned the princess accepted the new nurse. The change in Adrian was immediate. His shoulders straightened. The quiet father disappeared beneath centuries of royal discipline. When? They arrived only moments ago. And the nursery? Guarded double the watch. It has already been done. Adrian nodded once. No one enters without my permission. Mrs. Holloway inclined her head. Understood. He turned back to Alina. You should remain with Lyra. Who are they? The Crimson Regency. The name doesn't sound reassuring. It isn't. She waited. They advise the crown, and they also believe they know what's best for it. Alina recognized the careful wording. They disagree with you. Frequently. About Lyra? His silence answered before he spoke. They believe a princess who cannot see cannot rule. The words hung heavily between them. And you? I believe they underestimate my daughter. He looked directly at Alina. They'll underestimate you as well. Wouldn't that be useful? For the first time, the corner of Adrian's mouth almost lifted. Perhaps it wasn't quite a smile, but it was closer than before. He caught himself almost immediately, his expression returning to its familiar reserve. "I'll return as soon as I can." Elena nodded. "I'll be with Lyra." She turned towards the nursery, then stopped. "Your Majesty?" "Yes?" "I can't promise she'll trust me tomorrow." "No, I can only promise I'll earn it again if she doesn't." For a heartbeat, Adrian said nothing. Then he inclined his head, not as a king acknowledging an employee, but as a father recognizing someone who understood what the past 9 nurses never had. "That," he said quietly, "is the first promise today that gives me confidence." Elena returned to the nursery, unaware that, elsewhere in the castle, the first moves of a political game centuries in the making had already begun. The morning of the assembly arrived beneath steady rain. Water streamed down the towering windows of Blackthorn Castle, blurring the forests into shifting shades of silver and green. Elena woke before dawn, a habit that years of hospital shifts had carved into her routine. She dressed quietly. Her leather duffel still rested beside the wardrobe, still unpacked only halfway. For a long moment, she looked at it without moving. She had unpacked enough to work, not enough to stay. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Mrs. Holloway entered carrying a breakfast tray and several thick books. "I thought you might wish to review our customs before tonight." Elena eyed the stack. "Please don't tell me I need all of those. I would never be so cruel." The steward placed them carefully upon the desk. "You require only the important sections." "And those would be?" Mrs. Holloway opened the first volume. "Never interrupt a noble while they are speaking." "Reasonable, unless they interrupt you first. I had a feeling there'd be complications. There usually are." She turned another page. "Never accept gifts during an official gathering." "Because?" "They may constitute binding agreements." Elena sighed. "I dislike your legal system already." "We often do." Another page. "If someone offers ceremonial wine, decline politely. I don't drink much anyway. It is not the wine." "The toast?" Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Accepting a formal toast may acknowledge mutual obligation. So raising a glass can become a contract? It has before." Elena rubbed her forehead. "Your people have made ordinary conversation remarkably dangerous. We have had several centuries to perfect it." That earned the faintest smile from both women. After breakfast, Elena walked toward the nursery. Halfway down the corridor, she heard whispered voices. 2 young maids stood beside an open window. "She won't last. They all leave." "This one feels different. How do you know?" "Her Highness laughed yesterday. I heard she held Nurse Brooks's hand. And Lord Valor came because of her." The younger maid lowered her voice further. "I feel sorry for the nurse." Elena stepped into view. Both servants immediately straightened. "We're sorry, Miss Brooks. You've nothing to apologize for." The younger maid hesitated. "My little brother lost his hearing after an illness." Elena waited. "The way you speak to the princess," she smiled shyly. "It's how my mother speaks to him." Something warm settled quietly inside Elena. "Thank you." The girl curtsied before hurrying away. Simple kindness travelled through a household far faster than authority ever could. Apparently, Hope did as well. Inside the nursery, Lyra sat beside the grand piano. Her fingertips rested against the polished wood. Not playing. Listening, the instrument carried faint vibrations from rain striking the roof high above. "Good morning. I knew you were awake. You heard me? You breathe differently in the morning." Elena laughed. "I really should stop trying to surprise you." "You don't." Lyra smiled. "Father tries. And he always walks slower when he wants to pretend." Elena placed several small objects upon a nearby table. A wooden spoon, a folded towel, a ceramic mug, a tiny brass bell. "What are those?" "A game. I like games." Elena picked up the bell. "I'm going to place each object somewhere around the room." "All right. Then you'll tell me where they are." "I already know." Elena blinked. "You do?" "You put the mug beside the flowers." "Correct. The towel is on the piano. Correct again. The spoon's on the chair. Every answer was perfect. You never moved. I listened. Lyra smiled. You drag your left foot a tiny bit whenever you're carrying something. Elena looked down at herself. I do? Only a little. No report she had read mentioned the child's extraordinary auditory memory. Every document focused upon what Lyra lacked. Almost none described what she possessed. That omission troubled Elena more with every passing hour. She picked up another object. This time close your eyes. Lyra burst into laughter. You're funny. Elena laughed with her. I suppose I deserved that. A firm knock interrupted the lesson. Captain Rowan entered. Unlike the ceremonial guards, he wore practical black armour beneath a dark coat. A thin scar crossed one cheek. My king asked me to escort you later today. Is something wrong? I hope not. He glanced briefly toward the corridor before lowering his voice. The noble houses have begun arriving early. They're making a point. They are. Lyra spoke quietly. Captain, his stern expression softened immediately. Yes, Your Highness. Don't let anyone shout at Nurse Elena. I'll do everything I can. They'll still shout. The captain exchanged a brief glance with Elena. Children noticed far more than adults realized. Elsewhere in Blackthorn Castle, Adrian stood inside the Hall of Maps. Ancient parchment charts covered every wall, recording centuries of kingdoms, treaties, and forgotten borders. Captain Marcus approached carrying a sealed letter. The Eastern Gate. Adrian looked up. What about it? We detained one of the kitchen porters. On what grounds? He carried coded correspondence. Destination? House Morvain. Adrian's expression hardened. Read it. Marcus unfolded the intercepted note. The Guardian studies alone. She remains uncertain. Pressure may succeed. The child already favours her. The king appears emotionally compromised. Silence settled across the chamber. Marcus folded the message. There are others. There always are. Adrian slowly walked toward one of the oldest maps. They placed spies inside my household years ago. The difference? They're becoming careless. Marcus understood immediately. They think they've already won. They mistake affection for weakness. He rested one hand upon the ancient oak table. They continue making the same mistake. That afternoon, Alina found Adrian inside the palace library. Books climbed from polished floors to vaulted ceilings. Rolling ladders disappeared into shadows overhead. You wished to see me? I did. He closed the volume before him. Sit. She chose the chair opposite. The library felt strangely peaceful despite the storm gathering beyond its walls. You've been studying. So have your nobles. A faint smile crossed his face. They rarely stop. He slid a small wooden box across the table. What is it? Open it. Inside rested a simple silver pendant shaped like a raven. No jewels, no ornament, only careful craftsmanship worn smooth with age. It's beautiful. It belonged to my mother. Alina immediately closed the lid. I can't accept this. I expected you to say that. You specifically warned me not to accept gifts. This isn't one. She looked puzzled. It's identification. He opened the box again. During the hollow winter, every member of my household carried one. She lifted the pendant carefully. If anyone attempts to separate you from palace staff, show them this. It protects me. It identifies you. His gaze remained steady. No servant loyal to my family will ignore a request from the person carrying it. Alina hesitated. I'll return it. When all this ends. She nodded. A quiet silence followed. Then Adrian asked. When you first arrived, he glanced toward the window. Why did you leave your bag packed? She smiled sadly. I've learned not to become attached too quickly. To places, to hope. He studied her quietly. And now? Alina looked at the half-unpacked life waiting inside her room. I still haven't finished unpacking. No, but this morning What changed? I realized I'd stopped looking at the door. She hadn't noticed it until now. Yesterday, every room had felt temporary. Today she had caught herself thinking about tomorrow. That frightened her more than any council meeting. Because hope always carried the risk of loss. Neither of them noticed the servant lingering briefly beyond the library doors. He quietly disappeared into the corridor. Within the hour, another coded message reached Lord Vaylor. The Guardian was no longer preparing to leave. She was beginning to belong. And that made her far more dangerous than anyone in the Crimson Regency had anticipated. By early evening, every lantern inside Blackthorn Castle had been lit. Their warm glow reflected across polished marble floors, while long shadows stretched across vaulted ceilings, painted with scenes from centuries of royal history. Outside, rain washed quietly against towering stained glass windows, softening the harsh outlines of the mountains beyond. One by one, long black cars rolled through the front gates. Servants announced each arrival in clear, formal voices. House Morvain, House Valcrest, House Dorian, House Ashmore. Every family carried generations of influence. Every arrival represented another calculation, another alliance, another potential enemy. Inside the assembly hall, nobles greeted one another with polished smiles that rarely reached their eyes. Conversation sounded cordial enough to an outsider, yet beneath every pleasant exchange lay careful negotiations disguised as small talk. The eastern provinces continue prospering. So I've heard. Remarkable what stability accomplishes. Indeed, nothing spoken inside the chamber meant only what the words suggested. Every sentence contained another message beneath it. At the far end of the chamber, musicians played quietly from a raised gallery. A string quartet performed an elegant arrangement that drifted through the vast room without ever overpowering conversation. The music had not been chosen simply for entertainment. Like everything else inside Blackthorn Castle, it served a purpose. Soft melodies encouraged measured voices. Raised tempers became more noticeable when surrounded by calm. Along the walls stood servants dressed in charcoal uniforms trimmed with silver. Each carried a polished tray holding crystal glasses or delicate porcelain cups. They moved with remarkable precision, weaving silently between clusters of nobles while somehow never interrupting a conversation. Alina suspected they had perfected the art through years of experience. Near one towering fireplace, two elderly lords discussed trade routes extending across the northern kingdoms. Our shipping lanes remain secure. For now. You expect difficulties? I expect ambition. The second noble smiled faintly before lifting his glass. History rarely disappoints. Across the room, three younger aristocrats spoke in quieter voices. So that's the human? I expected someone older. I expected someone easier to frighten. Their eyes drifted briefly toward the entrance before quickly looking away again. One woman wearing emerald silk adjusted the jewels resting around her neck. They say the princess laughed. So the servants claim. I don't believe palace gossip. You soon will. Another noble quietly joined their circle. The Crimson Regency certainly believes it. That observation silenced the conversation. No one dismissed Lord Vaylor lightly. His reputation had been earned over centuries. He rarely acted without already knowing several moves ahead. Near the grand staircase, Chancellor Aldrin observed the gathering from a respectful distance. He leaned lightly upon a carved walnut cane, watching conversations form and dissolve across the hall like pieces moving across an enormous chessboard. He had attended more assemblies than almost anyone alive. Tonight felt different. Normally, debates revolved around territory, commerce, succession treaties, or military obligations. Nobles competed politely, alliances shifted, and compromises eventually emerged. This evening, however, nearly every discussion returned to the same subject: the human nurse. He overheard fragments as guests passed. She has no noble blood. The compact has never recognized a human. If precedent changes now, the neighbouring courts will question everything. His Majesty cannot allow sentiment to rewrite tradition. Few of them had actually met Alina Brooks. Most had already decided who she was. That troubled the Chancellor more than the guardianship itself. Across the chamber, Lord Vaylor stood beside one of the enormous stained-glass windows overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. The coloured light cast shifting patterns across his silver hair while he quietly reviewed several handwritten notes. Lady Seraphine approached. "The hall is full. It will be. You appear remarkably calm. I prepared for every likely outcome. And the unlikely ones?" Vaylor folded the papers neatly before slipping them inside his coat. "Those are usually the interesting ones." She studied him for a moment. "You truly believe the Guardian can be persuaded? I believe everyone has a pressure point. And if she doesn't, then we learn why." His answer revealed nothing more. Lady Seraphine had served alongside Vaylor for decades, yet even she could never fully determine how much he genuinely believed and how much he simply wished others to believe. On the opposite side of the assembly hall, Captain Rowan stood near the great entrance with a dozen royal guards. Unlike the ceremonial guards stationed throughout the palace, Rowan's soldiers watched every doorway, balcony and corridor with practiced discipline. Their eyes rarely lingered on the nobles. Instead, they watched the spaces between them. 2 guards quietly exchanged observations. South gallery? Clear. Western entrance? Clear. Roof access? Secured, Rowan gave a small nod but remained unconvinced. Years protecting the royal family had taught him that genuine threats rarely announced themselves openly. They appeared during distractions, celebrations, and moments when everyone else believed the danger had already passed. Tonight, the greatest distraction in the kingdom would soon walk through those doors, and every person inside the hall knew it. Outside the hall, Elena stood while Mrs. Holloway adjusted the sleeves of the midnight blue gown prepared for the evening. The dress was elegant without appearing extravagant. It contained no jewels, no embroidery, no symbols of rank. I feel terribly underdressed. Mrs. Holloway examined one cuff. "You look exactly as you should. They'll all be wearing crowns. They will. And jewels." Certainly, Alina looked down at her sensible black shoes. "I seem to have brought practicality to a royal gathering." Mrs. Holloway finally allowed herself a faint smile. "I recommend keeping the shoes." "Why? Practical people usually remain standing the longest." Before Alina could answer, Captain Rowan approached. He wore ceremonial armour tonight instead of his usual travelling uniform. The polished black steel reflected the lantern light, without revealing a single scratch despite years of service. "The hall is ready." He lowered his voice. "My orders remain unchanged." "What are they?" "If anyone attempts to separate you from His Majesty or the Princess, I intervene. I hope that won't become necessary." "So do I." He hesitated. Then added quietly, "There are more guards inside than usual. Because of me?" "Because of what you represent." The distinction unsettled her. The great doors slowly opened. Conversation inside faded almost immediately. More than 100 faces turned toward the entrance. Some looked curious, some openly dismissive. Others carried expressions so carefully neutral they revealed years of political training. Elena resisted the urge to stop walking. Instead, she remembered something an elderly patient had once told her during her first year as a nurse. "Walk slowly enough that fear never chooses your pace." She had never forgotten it. One measured breath, one deliberate step. Nothing more. At the far end of the chamber stood Adrian. Tonight he wore formal black robes embroidered with silver ravens instead of his usual tailored suit. He appeared older somehow, not in age, in responsibility. For the first time, Alina fully understood why entire kingdoms feared disappointing him. He was not merely a father. He carried the weight of 4 centuries upon his shoulders. Yet when their eyes met across the hall, the severity softened for the briefest instant. It lasted no more than a heartbeat. It was enough. Lord Vaylor slowly rose from his carved oak chair. Our honoured guardian has arrived. The title echoed throughout the assembly hall. Several nobles exchanged quiet glances, others whispered behind crystal glasses. Elena recognised the tactic immediately. They wanted her to become aware of every eye watching her, to remind her she did not belong. She refused to look away. Instead, she continued walking until she reached Adrian's side. Without turning his head, he spoke quietly. "You may leave at any point. I know. I will not think less of you." She looked across the hall. "I don't believe they're hoping I stay. No, they're hoping you begin doubting yourself." Before either could continue, Vaylor struck his ebony cane gently against the marble floor. The sound echoed once. Nothing more was required. The entire chamber fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his calm voice filled the room effortlessly. "For 4 centuries this assembly has existed for one purpose." He slowly turned. To preserve continuity. His gaze settled upon Elena. "Tonight we confront circumstances unseen for generations." He smiled politely. "A human has become High Guardian to the Crown Princess." The words hung heavily over the room. Vaylor continued. "Tradition requires that the assembly determine whether such an appointment serves the kingdom." Adrian finally spoke. "The compact has already determined that." "It has." Vaylor inclined his head respectfully. "The assembly merely examines the consequences." He turned toward Elena. "Nurse Brooks, before constitutional matters begin, may I ask one simple question?" She nodded. "What is it? Why did you truly accept employment inside this household?" Silence settled instantly. It was not an innocent question. Every noble understood exactly what he was doing. If Elena admitted financial desperation, they would call her opportunistic. If she spoke emotionally, they would dismiss her as naive. If she praised the royal family, they would accuse her of manipulation. There was no safe answer, unless it happened to be true. Elena looked slowly around the assembly, then answered. "I came because a child needed someone." Not another word followed. The chamber remained silent. Then she continued. "I stayed because she still does. No speech, no performance, only honesty." The whispers disappeared. Vaylor regarded her thoughtfully. An admirable sentiment. "It isn't a sentiment, it is reality." "No," she met his eyes without hesitation. "It's responsibility." Several councillors shifted uneasily. A younger noble near the rear of the chamber quietly folded his notes. Another lowered his wine glass without taking another drink. The atmosphere had changed. Nobody could quite explain why. Vaylor began walking slowly around the centre of the assembly. And responsibility requires wisdom. He stopped. "You are human. I am. You cannot understand the burdens carried by an immortal kingdom. I don't pretend to. Then surrender the guardianship. So someone else may decide what's best for Lyra. So experienced hands may guide her." Elena's expression remained calm. "I've met experienced hands." Her gaze travelled across the assembly. Most of them never asked what frightened her. Several faces hardened. Others looked away. Vaylor's smile faded. "You have known the princess scarcely 2 days. I've listened to her for 2 days. The distinction? It matters." She folded her hands calmly before her. "Every report I read described what Lyra did." She paused. None described what happened immediately before. Several physicians seated near the front exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I noticed something in less than an hour." "What?" "Every episode began after someone removed her choice." She looked around the chamber. Someone touched her unexpectedly. Someone restrained her. Someone changed her routine. No one asked permission. The silence deepened. "I didn't cure anything. I simply stopped frightening her." For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared across more than one noble face. They had arrived expecting to debate law. Instead, they found themselves quietly questioning years of accepted practice. Across the hall, Adrian remained perfectly still. Yet behind the calm expression, something almost forgotten stirred. Hope? Not because Elena was winning an argument. Because, for the first time in years, someone else understood the question he had been trying to answer all along. The silence lingered far longer than anyone expected. Lord Vaylor had presided over the assembly for nearly 2 centuries. He knew the room well enough to recognise hesitation when he saw it. Several nobles who had entered expecting a straightforward vote were no longer looking at Alina with suspicion. They were looking at one another. That alone concerned him. He rested both hands upon his ebony cane. A moving explanation. His voice remained smooth. But compassion alone cannot govern a kingdom. No, Alina agreed without hesitation. It can't. A few heads turned. Vaylor raised an eyebrow. You agree? I do. She looked around the chamber. A kingdom requires laws. It requires experienced advisors. It requires people who understand diplomacy. She smiled faintly. I happen to be none of those things. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly. Even several nobles who opposed her allowed themselves restrained smiles. Vaylor waited. Then perhaps you understand why this responsibility should rest elsewhere. I understand why everyone believes that. And you disagree? I disagree with the assumption. She looked directly at him. I'm not governing the kingdom. I'm protecting one child. The distinction settled over the hall. It isn't the same responsibility. Before Vaylor could answer, another noble stood. Lord Alaric of House Valcrest. Unlike Vaylor, he was younger in appearance, though centuries old by human standards. His silver hair was tied neatly behind his neck, and every movement reflected careful discipline. If I may. Vaylor inclined his head. Proceed. Alaric turned toward Elena. Nurse Brooks. Lord Valcrest. You claim your concern is solely for the princess. It is. Then answer me honestly. I will. What happens 20 years from now? The question surprised several councillors. Alaric continued. Princess Lyra will become queen. You will grow old. You will die. Our sovereign will still be young. He folded his hands. How can someone whose life is measured in decades prepare a ruler whose life may span millennia? The chamber murmured again. It was a fair question. Even Adrian listened carefully. Elena thought for several moments before answering. I can't. Silence. I cannot teach Princess Lyra what it means to live 400 years. She looked toward Adrian. Neither can any book. Then back to Alaric. But that's not what she needs from me. What does she need? Someone who helps her become the kind of person capable of learning everything else. Alaric frowned. She continued. Children don't become wise because adults lecture them. They become wise because someone makes them feel safe enough to ask questions. She smiled gently. I've spent years working with frightened children. They learn remarkably little while they're terrified. Several physicians seated along the western side quietly exchanged glances. One elderly doctor slowly nodded to himself. Lady Seraphine rose once more. If safety is your only concern, she stepped closer. Why refuse the assistance of those who possess greater experience? I haven't. Seraphine looked puzzled. You refused our guidance. I refused your necklace. A faint laugh escaped somewhere near the rear of the hall. Seraphine's smile tightened. You continue misunderstanding diplomacy. No, Alina answered calmly. I understand pressure when I see it. The chamber became still again. You offered me a gift before asking a single question about Lyra. She looked round the room. No one has asked whether she slept well. No one asked whether today's meeting frightened her. No one asked how she's coping. Her voice remained gentle. You've all discussed the guardianship. Very few of you have discussed the child. The words struck harder than the accusation. Because they were true. Near the centre of the chamber, an elderly noblewoman slowly stood. She had remained silent throughout the proceedings. Unlike the others, she wore no elaborate crown. only a simple silver pin shaped like an olive branch. Mrs. Holloway quietly leaned toward Elena. "Lady Helena. Who is she?" "The oldest living judge in the kingdom." Lady Helena spoke in a quiet voice that nevertheless carried throughout the hall. "I have a question." Vela bowed respectfully. Always she ignored him. Her eyes rested upon Elena. "When you first met the princess, yes? What did you see?" The room waited. Elena smiled sadly. "I didn't." Several nobles frowned. "Because she couldn't see?" "No, because I stopped looking." Silence. I started listening instead. Lady Helena nodded slowly. "And what did you hear?" "A little girl apologizing." The assembly remained motionless. She kept saying she was sorry. Elena swallowed quietly. No one else seemed to notice. She looked around the chamber. "I've heard frightened children apologize before. They apologize because they think becoming afraid disappoints the adults around them." Her voice softened. No child should ever believe they're responsible for frightening grown-ups. Across the hall, Adrian lowered his eyes. Those words found wounds centuries of discipline had never completely hidden. Vela recognized the mood changing. He could not allow emotion to replace politics. He struck his cane against the marble floor once more. "The assembly is not a children's hospital." "No," Elena answered. "It's much quieter." Several unexpected laughs escaped. Even Captain Rowan struggled not to smile. Vela ignored the reaction. The issue remains constitutional. It does. The Guardian now possesses authority to advise the Crown Princess. Yes, authority that influences succession. Eventually, you consider that insignificant? I consider it secondary. Vela's expression cooled. There is nothing secondary about succession. There is if the heir never reaches adulthood healthy enough to inherit it. The reply landed like a stone. Nobody interrupted. Vela changed tactics. If the compact chose correctly, he looked across the assembly, then surely it can choose again. He turned back toward Elena. "Resign. Allow the child another opportunity. If she chooses you again," he spread his hands. "This discussion ends forever." The proposal sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Elena looked toward Adrian. He remained silent. He would not answer for her. She understood why. The choice had to be entirely hers. Mrs. Holloway's warning returned to her. The most dangerous offers are the ones that appear generous. Elena faced Velor. "No." The single word echoed through the chamber. "You refuse to test the compact?" "I refuse to test a child." She took one step forward. "Trust isn't an experiment. You don't repeatedly ask frightened children whether they still feel safe. You become the person who never makes them ask." Even Lord Alaric lowered his eyes, because no law in the kingdom offered an argument against that. The massive doors suddenly opened. Not violently. Simply enough for everyone to turn. Mrs. Holloway stood at the entrance. Beside her was Lyra. The little princess held Mrs. Holloway's hand with quiet confidence. Captain Rowan followed a respectful distance behind. Adrian's expression changed immediately. "Lyra," she tilted her head. "I know. I wasn't supposed to come. You should be resting. I couldn't. Why?" She looked around the hall. "Everyone keeps talking about me." The words carried through the silent assembly. She slowly released Mrs. Holloway's hand, then began walking. Not toward the throne, not toward her father, toward Elena. Every noble watched. No one breathed. Each careful step echoed softly across polished marble. Elena remained exactly where she stood. She did not move closer. She did not reach out. She waited. The same way she had waited on the nursery floor 2 days earlier. Lyra smiled as she reached her. Then quietly placed her small hand into Elena's. "I already chose." Nothing happened. No light, no thunder, no ancient magic visible to the eye. Only the quiet certainty of a child making the same decision twice. Across the hall, Lady Helena slowly rose. The compact has spoken again. Every noble understood. This time there could be no argument. The choice had been reaffirmed freely, publicly before witnesses from every great house. Lord Vela slowly lowered his head, not in surrender, in recognition. The law he had spent a lifetime studying had just closed every path he intended to use. Adrian looked across the assembly. His voice remained calm. The matter is settled. No one answered, because no lawful answer remained. The noble inclined his head slightly. I have another question for the Guardian. Adrian's voice remained level. You have already questioned her extensively. I wish the assembly to understand precisely what has occurred. Without waiting for permission, Valor turned back toward Elena. Tell us, Nurse Brooks, before arriving at Blackthorn Castle, had you ever heard of the blood succession compact? No. Had you ever intended to become guardian to a royal heir? No. Did you seek influence? No power? No. Wealth? No. Each answer arrived without hesitation. Vela slowly folded his hands over the head of his ebony cane. So you claim this extraordinary position found you entirely by accident? I didn't say accident. Several eyebrows rose around the chamber. I said I never sought it. The elderly lord regarded her thoughtfully. Interesting distinction. Alina met his gaze. I've worked with frightened children for years. She paused. They don't care about titles. They don't care about politics. They don't care who wins arguments. They only care whether the adult standing beside them means what they say. The room remained silent. When Lyra asked if I'd come back, I promised I would. She looked around the chamber. I kept my promise. A younger noble rose from the third row. And that qualifies you to influence the future of the crown? No, she answered before anyone else could. It qualifies me to keep one promise. Another murmur swept through the gathering. The younger noble frowned. You continue reducing matters of state to matters of childcare. Because your future queen is still a child. No one immediately replied. Even nobles who disagreed with her found it difficult to argue against something so plainly true. Vela changed tactics. Very well. He nodded towards several attendants waiting beside the wall. Bring them forward. 2 servants carried a polished oak table into the centre of the hall. Upon it rested several leather-bound volumes sealed with silver clasps. Elena recognised none of them. The Royal Succession Archives, Velor explained. For centuries, every guardian has completed formal instruction before assuming responsibility. He rested one hand upon the books. Can you read ancient court? No. Royal inheritance law? No. Military succession protocols? No. Diplomatic inheritance customs? No. Each admission strengthened the confidence spreading across portions of the assembly. Vela looked almost sympathetic. You see, he addressed the hall. The guardian herself acknowledges she lacks the knowledge required. Alina glanced at the stack of books. Then, back at him. You're right. The admission surprised everyone. I don't know those things. She looked toward Adrian. I've never governed a kingdom. Then toward the nobles. I've never negotiated treaties. I've never managed noble houses. I've never commanded armies. Several councillors nodded. Finally, she understood. But Alina continued. I've also never claimed I could. Confusion spread through the chamber. My responsibility isn't to govern. She looked toward Valor. It's to protect one little girl until she's old enough to govern herself. Silence. If someone needs surgery, I don't ask the gardener. If someone needs a bridge designed, I don't ask a musician. And if a frightened child needs someone she trusts her eyes settled on Lyra, I don't think the deciding qualification is knowing inheritance law. A low murmur travelled across the chamber. This time it sounded different. Less hostile. More thoughtful. Lord Cassian rose from his chair. If you remain guardian, will you interfere in affairs of state? No. Will you attempt to influence foreign policy? No. Military appointments? No. Taxation? No. Cassian folded his arms. Then, what exactly do you intend to do? Elena smiled slightly. My job. The noble frowned. And what is that? She answered simply. Make sure Lyra grows into someone capable of making those decisions herself. Several older nobles exchanged glances. It was such an ordinary answer that it became difficult to challenge. Lady Seraphine stepped forward again. You speak beautifully. I'm answering questions. You speak as though kindness alone can govern kingdoms. I never said that, didn't you? No, Alina's expression remained calm. I think kingdoms require laws. They require capable leaders. They require wisdom. She looked directly at the noblewoman. But children require kindness. And if you fail there, her voice softened. You'll never have the capable leader you're hoping for. No one interrupted. Across the chamber, one elderly counsellor slowly stood. His name had not yet been mentioned. Unlike the others, he wore no elaborate robes, only a dark grey coat with a silver raven embroidered upon the collar. He bowed first to Adrian, then toward Lyra, finally toward Elena. I am Chancellor Aldrin. His voice carried the weight of great age. I served under His Majesty's father. The room became noticeably quieter. I have witnessed 4 guardians. He looked around the assembly. 3 were selected through influence, 1 through fear. He turned toward Elena. This is the first selected by affection. The words settled over the hall like fresh snow. Lady Seraphine frowned. Are you declaring support? I am declaring observation. Aldrin looked toward the nobles. We continue speaking as though guardianship grants authority over the princess. It does not. It grants responsibility toward her. He glanced toward Elena. I've observed nothing tonight suggesting the guardian misunderstands that distinction. Valor's expression remained composed. Yet Elena noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. For the first time that evening, someone of unquestioned authority had publicly shifted the mood of the assembly. Another counsellor stood. Then another. Not everyone agreed. Some continued insisting that tradition demanded a guardian raised within noble society. Others argued that precedent mattered more than sentiment. The debate stretched into the evening. Elena listened far more than she spoke. Whenever addressed directly, she answered honestly. Whenever she did not know something, she admitted it. Gradually, an unexpected thing happened. The assembly stopped treating her as an intruder. Instead, they began treating her as a participant, not because they accepted her, because they could no longer dismiss her. Hours passed. Candles burned lower. Fresh tea replaced wine upon many tables. Even the servants moved more quietly now. At one point Lyra quietly leaned against Adrian. Father? Yes? Are meetings always this long? They usually last longer. She sighed dramatically. I preferred the blanket fort. Several nearby nobles couldn't suppress faint smiles. The innocent remark broke much of the remaining tension. Even Chancellor Aldrin chuckled. I confess, Your Highness, he said, I would also prefer the blanket fort. A ripple of restrained laughter spread across the hall. For one brief moment, the assembly remembered that the future of the kingdom was not merely a constitutional question. It was a little girl growing sleepy long before the adults had finished arguing about her future.